Welcome to the October 12th, 2022 meeting of the Lake Forest City Plan Commission meeting. My name's John Dixon. I am chairman of the Plan Commission. At this time, I'd like to ask commission members to introduce themselves. I'll start on my far left.
Barrett Davy.
Louis Pickus.
Jamie Moorhead.
Mark Pasquazi.
And from the city of Lake Forest, we have Miss Kathy Cernak here tonight. The first item before the commission this evening is consideration of the minutes from the May 11th, 2022 meeting. Are there any comments, questions, or clarifications?
I have a clarification, Mr. Chairman. I am listed as absent at that meeting when I was in fact present, as shown in the body of the minutes as well. So,
Thank you.
thanks, Kathy.
We'll ask the city to make that correction to those minutes. Are there any other clarifications or questions on the May 11th meeting? Do I have a motion to accept the May minutes?
So moved.
Meeting minutes. That's a lot of M's there. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item before the commission is consideration of the minutes from the August 2022 meeting. Are there any comments or questions or clarifications in regards to the August minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the August minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those carry. The first matter before the commission this evening is a special use permit for the Faith Lutheran Church and consideration of the associated tentative and final plot re-subdivision. No new lots are being proposed and no change to the overall use of the properties is being proposed. The existing land area owned by the church is proposed for incorporation into the overall church campus. At this point, I'd like to ask any commission members if there's any conflicts of interest or ex parte communication in regards to this matter.
No.
None. At this time, I'd like to swear in everyone who thinks they may want to testify either in support or opposition to this matter. If you would, please stand where you are and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I will ask the petitioner to come forward to our podium for their presentation. Please state your name.
Good evening. I'm Mike Edelman, 1190 West Old Mill Road. Good evening, Chairman Dixon, Plan Commission members, staff.
Welcome back, Mr. Edelman. Nice to have you here this evening. We're ready for your presentation.
Great to be here. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. So welcome to the new faces. And it's also, I have to say, a pleasure to be here with a petition that's pretty benign and perfunctory as opposed to some of the prior ones I've been here that have been a little more controversial. I'm the attorney for Faith Lutheran Church over on Deer Path Road. The church is at 680 Deer Path. They have a parsonage at 688. And in 2001, they acquired 700, which is a residence. There's a survey up on the screen in the hard copy that Kathy circulated just a short while ago. The staff report and our statement of intent pretty thoroughly covers all the issues, so I don't want to rehash all of that, but for the benefit of any public, I'll just go through a thumbnail. Our request is for a re-subdivision of the 3 existing lots. We're in an R3 zoning district. The 2 residences are on 37,500 square foot lots, which is just under the 40,000 square foot requirement under R3 zoning. The church is on an approximate 40,000 square foot lot, which conforms to R3 zoning, but the church is a special use. The church has been at this location since about 1955, so we're coming up on almost 70 years. and it's had 3 prior special use permits issued to it in 1980, 89, and 99. All of those entailed additions and changes of use. Today's petition, which includes an amendment to the special use permit, has no anticipated change of use or hardscape or construction of any improvements. This is really kind of a request for a virtual re-subdivision of the 3 lots into new 3 lots that more realistically reconcile and conform with the way the 3 properties have been used for the last 3 decades. As you can see on the survey, that the driveway to the parking in the back of the church really comes in over lot 12, which will be the new lot 2. So effectively, that parsonage has had the driveway for the church coming over its land. All 3 properties are owned by 3 separate LLCs. However, the managing member of each of the 3 LLCs is the same. It's North Shore Lutheran Ministry. It's got 4 directors, the president of whom is Joel Minster, who's here this evening. So what we're proposing to do is re-subdivide the 3 lots into new 3 lots, taking the backyard, taking about 40% off 700 West Deer Path, which is a grassy area which has been used for church activities. The kids play out there when there have been picnics and occasional outdoor events. And then about 70% of the north portion of the 688 lot would be removed from that lot and reconfigured into the new church lot. So the church would be on newly formed lot 1, approximating 80,000 square feet. The parsonage at 688 would be left on about 11,000 square feet of land, reduced from the 37,500. That's non-conforming under R3 zoning, but today it exists as a non-conforming lot, so we're not creating any new non-conforming lots. I did a bulk scale calculation. The 2 residences, the parsonage and the residence at 700, both of them are under the bulk scale maximum that's permissible, so we're not creating any violations of building scale. This could have been done with an administrative property line shift, but because we're amending the special use permit, which is necessary because of the church use of the residential lot, it just felt more appropriate to do a formal request to the Plan Commission for a re-subdivision. In my statement of intent, I did not do a special use permit analysis, the 7 points, because there's a presumption from my perspective that with the 3 prior special use permits, it met those standards, and we're not changing anything in the way of use, hardscape, no construction. It's really just going to be an invisible event, moving the lot lines around. And the purpose of which is so that at some point in the future, if the church either feels compelled to or just elects to let's say, sell the 700 residents or the 688 residents, that they're not giving up land that historically, as I said, for the past 3 decades or so, have been utilized by the church for parking and the play area or picnic area for the congregation. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Thank you. I'll turn to the city. Kathy, identification of the issues there.
Sure, thank you, Chairman Dixon. This is an unusual special use permit amendment. The reason that this is before you is because the boundaries of the church campus are changing. The boundaries are identified in the earlier special use permits, the first of which was granted in the early 80s, I believe, recognizing the church, which had been in existence since the mid-1950s. So as Mr. Edelman said, were it not for the special use permit, and if all the lots were already conforming and we weren't creating any nonconformities, theoretically, we could have shifted property lines between adjacent properties through an administrative property line shift. But this seemed a bit more complicated. So it is before you for an amendment to the special use permit only with respect to the boundary of the church campus. It is also before you for a re-subdivision, which will formalize the reduction in size of both the 688 and 700 residential properties, and it will reconfigure the larger church campus property. This area is unique. It really isn't part of a neighborhood. It abuts Route 41, actually the old Westmoreland Road right-of-way to the east. It abuts Lake Forest Club to the north, and further to the north is Lake Forest Hospital. To the west, there is a third single-family residential house. That property is owned by Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital. And then further to the west, you have open space, which borders the entrance to the hospital from Deer Path Road. So these three homes really are disconnected. They really aren't part of the neighborhood on the south side of Deer Path, and they certainly aren't part of the neighborhood to the west of the hospital. As Mr. Edelman stated, both the 688 and 700 properties today do not conform to the minimum lot size in the R3 zoning district. That resulted from a change in the zoning district regulations many years ago. As Mr. Edelman noted, the existing houses, the square footage of those houses and the garages would still be in conformance with the code with the reduced size in both of those lots. Obviously, the reduction in the size of those lots would limit the future square footage on those lots. If, for instance, one or both of those houses were sold to someone else, a house was torn down, someone wanted to build a new house, the square footage would be more limited than it is with the configuration of the lots today. And to receive either a zoning variance in the future for a new or expanded house on either of these lots, or to receive a variance from the square footage limitations, I believe would be a high bar, because this action that's being considered tonight is something that is done by a current property owner, or perhaps in the future a previous property owner, which created the hardship, reduced the size of the lots, which would make it difficult for a board or commission to approve a variance. These requests recognize what occurs with these properties today. Clearly, the 688 property is already encumbered and really visually, functionally is part of that church campus. The driveway extends north and south across the eastern edge of that property. The house itself serves as a parsonage for the church. The 700 house, it's my understanding that at times it has served as housing for someone affiliated with the church, other times it's been rented, but there will be no visual change to the streetscape, and there will be no functional change as a result of what's proposed. If you choose to take action tonight, it would be, you do have a recommendation in your staff report, findings in support of an amendment to the special use permit, and you also have a recommendation in support of, recommendation to the city council approving the plat of re-subdivision. A technicality, normally plats come to you in tentative phase and then a final phase, but in the case of a subdivision like this or a re-subdivision, there's no engineering to be done, so reviewing a plat of subdivision in a single action is appropriate. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments, or anybody want any clarification, either from the city or from the petitioner?
I have just one question for Kathy. Does this re-subdivision create a lot in depth situation with that lot, the 680 lot?
It does, the frontage on the 680 lot is less than what is required. So technically, I guess it could be called a lot in depth. It doesn't function as a lot in depth. I think in the past, when we've had lots that have significant street frontage, but really have a presence on the street, we haven't necessarily referred to those as a lot in depth. But I think in the future, if someone came forward to demolish the house and build a new house, that's certainly something we need to take into consideration. As you know, the width of the 688 lot does not meet the minimum width required in that zoning district. But I will point out that even today, with that access for the church running along the eastern side, functionally, the width of that 688 lot is already reduced to what's being proposed.
Okay, that's all I have.
Any other comments? Anything else from the, or I should ask if there's any public testimony comments? Seeing none, I'll turn back to the petitioner. Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Edelman? Nothing else from staff? Okay. At this point, the testimony and comment period is now closed. At this point in the meeting, we have the opportunity to discuss any comments, any issues in regards with just the commissioner members in regards to this petition? Anything? No issue. Then is there a motion for a special use permit for the Faith Lutheran Church to allow an expansion of the church campus boundary to reflect the existing uses?
So moved. Second.
I think we need a motion, like a,
Well, I'm making that motion.
Okay,
Yeah.
you'd like to make
I'll make the motion.
formal motion?
Make the motion.
Commissioner Davy, and the formal motion being as recommended by the staff, their points 1 and 2 in our report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
second that.
Are we going to take a,
A voice vote is fine.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I would also ask, I didn't hear that motion incorporated the re-subdivision, so unless I
I
missed
think it was the staff recommendation 1 and 2, Kathy. The second recommendation was the plat of re-subdivision to reconfigure the properties and to consist with the amended special use permit.
Thank you, and that was everyone's understanding.
Yes.
I will make sure the motion reads in that way. Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
motion passes 5-0. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you so much. The next matter we have before the commission this evening is the discussion, direction, input on the topic of outdoor speakers for music at restaurants in the city of Lake Forest. Are you making the presentation tonight? So I'll turn it over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, our management analyst Reagan Walsh did do some of the research, but was unable to attend tonight, but I hope to have him before you here shortly. At your May meeting, when the commission was discussing Sophia Steak requested the ability to have speakers outdoors on the patio for, as I recall, they talked about subtle background music. It was noted by the commission that the code, the performance standards for restaurants in the code specifically prohibit outdoor speakers or amplified sound on restaurant patios. So this commission, as a separate recommendation from your recommendation in support of Sophia Steak without the outdoor speakers, asked us to recommend to the City Council that we relook at this provision. The council supported that, and we did the research, and it's now back before you. The questions before the commission really are, should the current prohibition, complete prohibition on outdoor speakers and amplified sound at restaurants stand, or should it be removed, or should it be modified in some way? A little bit of background. As we moved into the pandemic, the City Council gave staff direction to be flexible and creative, be flexible in a whole bunch of ways, find ways to make outdoor dining possible in more instances, whether it was using parking spaces or parking lots, or to allow heaters, and the outdoor speakers seemed to be something that went along the lines of being flexible and really encouraging and supporting outdoor dining. So we do know today that there are a number of restaurants, some newer, some older, that have outdoor speakers. I will say that there is a difference between those restaurants that are located more centrally in the business district and those that are located at the edge of the business district. Sophia Steak did install outdoor speakers, and one evening we did have some complaints, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but it was really a situation. They didn't even have outdoor diners, whether it was for the valet, whether it was because all the staff was new and they didn't know to turn something on or off. But the music was on, it was loud, and it was on late. So that didn't help this discussion, in my opinion, because we've already had a situation there. That was one evening, and it was addressed. We've also, from time to time, had complaints about Kuro Bistro, which is also, it's on Woodland, on the southwest corner of Woodland, and also immediately adjacent to residential homes. So we do know that there's a difference. From the staff perspective, it seems reasonable and certainly common, as we looked at other municipalities, to allow outdoor speakers in some form on at least restaurants that are located well away from residential areas. Really interested in your thoughts about which direction we go. A couple things staff thought were important. If you do approve outdoor speakers, there should be a perhaps a restriction that it can be music only and not Sam, your order's ready, or, pick up at window 15. I think those are very different types of sounds. Certainly today, as opposed to several years ago, limiting decibels, enforcing that limitation is easier, but we also want to be aware of the fact that staff also doesn't want to, I shouldn't say we don't want to, we will of course do it, but if complaints are regularly received and staff is out there with an iPhone measuring decibels every other Saturday and saying this is 2 decibels over, so we're just interested in your thoughts about which direction should we move. With your input, we will go back, think through some more, if appropriate, draft some code language, work with the city attorney. We would bring it back to you, and ultimately you would conduct a public hearing and consider it further. On the other hand, if you choose to go the other direction, you can also say status quo. So with that, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
I'll start to my far right. Start with you.
Sure. So I think that we should find some way to allow speakers, outdoor speakers at restaurants. The two options I looked at as most compelling to me was, basically no restrictions, leave it up to the city ordinance on noise generally, which is unreasonable noise that interferes with the quiet enjoyment of adjoining lots within 1,000 feet of the location. And that's literally us doing nothing and saying, leave it up to the police basically to handle those complaints. So I don't love that option. I think I forget what number, I think it was number 5 on the options, which had to do with the decibels, is monitoring, allowing outdoor speakers and determining a decibel level that is acceptable. I think that's going to be a challenge, but nonetheless, that's where I'm leaning. I feel like outdoor speakers, I think, are vital to some of these restaurants. And just for the overall enjoyment, I think it would be a nice thing to offer and to find a way to allow restaurants to be able to have that is where I'm leaning.
Can I ask a question? I know it's out of order, but I'm interested if you're thinking decibel levels would vary from restaurants centrally located and those at the edge.
I'd rather not. I mean, I'd rather keep it consistent. And that's, it goes to what our level is and where we're monitoring the decibel levels from. Is it at what point? Is it at the edge of the restaurant boundary or from the property in question, I guess? But yeah, I would want to be consistent regardless of the location of the restaurant within the city or central business district.
Thank you. Commissioner Moorhead.
I agree with Commissioner Pasquesi that speakers would be a good idea. Point 5 on the options, I left my reading glasses in the car. Point 5 on options for commission consideration is the good one, as I think a good one. I would be inclined to give the city as many hammers as possible to kind of deal with issues as they arise. So I would do a decibel level and a distance from the property line, so they have that flexibility. And then with restaurants within 150 feet that require the special use, I would also use number 4, so those can be evaluated during the special use. But beyond that, I think I agree pretty much entirely. And the staff report was really good. So I got that. It's really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Moorhead. I do have some comments on this. The chart I thought was great. A little complicated maybe for my simple brain, but what did you find? I mean, basically, did other communities allow, decibel limits? I didn't see sound strictly prohibited at the property line. Like, what communities allowed sort of music and how did they govern it in a general sense?
Many communities most communities had no regulations specific to restaurants. Instead, they did measure, and if you look at that chart, you can see several communities that did establish a decibel limit at the property line. And our code, the general noise provision, other than the prohibition for restaurants, speaks to within 1,000 feet. Property line, again, from an enforcement standpoint, we could go out and more easily estimate the property line than walk off 1,000 feet and measure it there.
For those,
But
I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
But many communities, not all, did have an established decibel limit and did identify where that measurement should be taken.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, you mentioned that these weren't necessarily restaurants, the decibel limits. These other communities were other businesses, what was the acceptable decibel limit?
I
I'm just-
think there's some information,
But that some of these communities have enforced or implemented in terms of, I see here what kind of common noise levels are. Do we know what other communities have used as that threshold?
I think we found some that went as low as 65 decibels.
Wow.
And some that were more, higher, but those restaurants seem to be away from residential areas.
Okay.
I think it's that perimeter, that seemed, well, obviously it's more sensitive. If you've been out here, perhaps tonight when you go out, Le Colonial has speakers, and there are times when those speakers are fairly loud in the parking lot. I have talked to the neighbors on Oakwood, just to check in with them about lights, brightness of lights and noise, and they have not been bothered by any of those yet. It'll be interesting as we move into winter and the leaves are gone if there's a change. So this, I believe that this level of sound that Le Colonial uses at times would probably be problematic at Sophia Steak.
Wow.
But we could also do some measuring of sound. We could work with Le Colonial and have them turn it up and down, and then go have a drink, and then turn it up and down again. And
I like to go have the drink part in that equation, right?
So just to keep this moving along, I agree with the two commissioners, Commissioner Pasquesi and Commissioner Moorhead. However, I differ on the way in which it should be measured. And I think music should be allowed. I think trying to come up with a decibel limit or a foot parameter is going to be challenging to govern, could lead to conflicts. You know, my iPhone says it's at decibel 20 and your iPhone says it's at decibel 30. We're 150 feet, we just paste it off. I would do away with that, in my opinion, and I would just use the reasonable standard, which is in number 2 on the list. And to combat that and to alleviate that, I would look at the punishment provisions in the statute and increase the punishment violations and have it on a sliding scale, so that a first violation is X $100, a second violation increases, triples that, and a third violation escalates it even higher to a misdemeanor. And I would refer the staff to look at college towns and how they control sound, and how they monitor it. And having 3 college-age students, 2 of whom are boys, 2 of whom have lived off campus. I won't go into my personal experiences, but I'm blessed to say they've all graduated. However, that's not without a hiccup, and I do know that that has been effective, because if you're in a close neighborhood environment, it's the reasonableness standard, there's no dispute, it's the perspective of the officer or the neighbor, and if there's continued violations, the punishment increases. That would be my suggestion. That's it.
How would you define reasonable, though, in that, in
It's-
the eyes of?
The prudent man, right? I mean, go back to the old law school standard,
Yeah.
right? And so, reasonableness, it would be between the neighbor, the charging officer, right? Is it reasonable? And I would also hope, I guess my other comment would be that, I think the restaurants in town are reputable restaurants with reputable ownership. And I do think it would be a little self-policing. And if it's not, I do think it would correct itself in terms of pressure publicly being put on that restaurant, as well as the escalation of the violations. And then you just, in my opinion, you would just eliminate the feet from, the decibel levels of, and you could still go that route, but I think a reasonable standard would be better.
I can tell you from experience that when the police get calls about noise, it is rarely found unreasonable, and it often gets bumped to us for, is there a special use permit? Is the restaurant allowed? Is the use allowed? Is the football game allowed at the college? So the reasonableness to me is, it is a little tricky, and even though the decibels could be difficult at times, it may provide more certainty, and at least for us to pinpoint exactly,
I mean, if the staff feels as if, the decibel level and metering out the decibel levels is easier to regulate, I certainly would not be opposed to that. But with that said, I still would look at the escalation of the violation, because if you have that hanging over anybody, that will be very self-policing. That's all my comment.
I think, well, I'll start with Kathy. I think the report was very good. Start with that. I do agree with the rest of my fellow commissioners about we should try to find a way to lift this prohibition. I do think that we need to be more objective. I think the reasonableness standard, I think, is just too hard to enforce. And I think if, the way to try to make it as objective as possible is the city invests in a $500 decibel meter. We take the readings at the property line, so we don't have to pace off, or is there a tree in the way or whatever. And then I think one other thing that we could do is you set the limit, you turn the music up to meet that limit, and then you let the neighbors hear what it sounds like, so they know what the baseline is, so they're ready for it. And then if they feel like it's louder than it should be, they make the call. I mean, maybe we're going too deep into the weeds here, but I think there's a way to, I think using a decibel limit at the property line would be my recommendation. Keeps it as objective as possible, and everybody's kind of playing with the same field. One neighbor, the neighbor behind the gallery is different than the neighbor next to Sophia Steak. They're going to have a different view of what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and I think it's going to make it really hard on city and staff to try to arbitrate what's good and what's not good. Excuse me. So that's it. That's my thoughts.
Commissioner Tatum.
Yeah, so, I mean, I do think, and I think the enforcement discussion is one we can go round and round on. I mean, my recovering attorney brain goes to the reasonableness standard as well. But, I think just I guess on the approval side of things, because originally when we had this discussion, it was, hey, no loudspeakers or amplification are allowed, right? And so, now are we talking about, from an approval perspective, saying, hey, yeah, everybody can do it, and we'll have a reasonableness standard, or we'll have some objective decibel level standard, or could we also be saying, hey, we may allow it, but it still always requires the special use permit to have speakers? Is that is that up for debate as well? Versus saying, hey, yeah, anybody can have speakers as long as they're,
Well, I'll let Kathy answer the question, but the city council does have to amend the ordinance and pass the ordinance.
Right.
So then you're saying assuming an ordinance does get passed, what happens to the existing
right, well,
permits?
I read in here that others that are under restaurants already authorized by a special use permit would be required to request an amendment to the current. So my question is if are we suggesting, hey, when I read the original, whatever this was a few meetings back, when I read it originally, I'm reading it as no loudspeakers, there's no noise outside. We talked about how there were places that had just gone ahead and put up their own speakers, and I understand we discuss it in the context of Sophia Steak. And so if we ultimately, you know, and we're not making that recommendation, we're just having a conversation today, but if the recommendation ultimately is, hey, change this ordinance, you know, is there a middle ground where you would be suggesting to the city council, hey, change the ordinance to now open the possibility of speakers, but that still needs to come before, you know, the plan commission, you know, for a special use? Or is the recommendation gonna be ultimately, hey, let's change the ordinance, allow speakers, and then we'll just have an enforcement we'll be specific about clarification, or specific about enforcement?
From the staff perspective, keep in mind that only restaurants within 150 feet of a residential district today require a special use permit. So others don't. So theoretically, depending on what your recommendation is, depending on what the council does, if you change the code to strike the prohibition, then restaurants
Got it.
that are not within 150 feet can have loudspeakers, amplified music within any particular parameters that you put in there. The question really goes to you. For those restaurants that are within 150 feet, they would still need to come to you, a new restaurant. As part of that, do you want to have the consideration, do you want to consider at that point whether there should be loudspeakers permitted, depending on, is it in a single-family neighborhood? Is it in, near apartments? Is it near the railroad tracks? Because those restaurants are all in different types of neighborhoods.
Right, and that's what I was kinda getting at, was,
And
you know, do you still
I
have
don't
the-
know, it depends where you guys
do
go
you-
with that.
You know, do you still have the folks that live in those buildings that are close to those restaurants who are coming forward, and now they're, you know, they're obviously concerned about it, right? And is there a process for them to air their concerns, you know, while we might still be okay with, you know, supporting it for the restaurant's, you know, success? So,
I don't think we need a special use for restaurants that are outside of the 150-foot
Okay.
Yeah.
area.
Right.
Inside the 150-foot radius, they have to get a special use, and I think amplified
Anyway.
music should be a consideration as far as granting that special use. So,
okay,
that's my thought.
yeah.
But that
I-
there would no longer be the prohibition against outdoor speakers within that.
Correct.
Special use permit process, okay. Yeah.
But I think as they go through the special use process, though, Plan Commission could say,
Sure.
we approve, but we don't approve amplified music.
Yep.
And to me, that's the, you know, your hammers that you're talking about, Jamie, I think
Yeah.
that, to me, is, I'm just wondering if we still wanna hold on to that. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because you're gonna have practically, the city is gonna have that conversation with the residents anyways, and we might as well have it here.
Sure.
In a public forum.
Cause I would be pro changing the ordinance, you know, I think they made a compelling argument for why, you know, having some sort of, system to create the environment they're trying to create, and we dined at both restaurants now, and, you know, Sophia wasn't loud when I was there, but maybe it was.
Well, just to summarize, I hear what I think is unanimous support for moving in the direction of removing the prohibition. We have in the past worked with a very good acoustical engineer at the college we worked with him, at the hospital we worked with him. His name is Tom Thunder, which
It's a great name.
it is a great name.
Very wrestler or something, but.
And he swears he didn't change his name.
Branding.
But my inclination is maybe we will reach out to him and get his thoughts on, is a decibel limit reasonable? Is it, and something one of you said, maybe if we do set a decibel, the code actually reads the decibel level as determined by the city. So that there's not that opportunity to say, my phone says this, we make that clear in the code. And then we ask him, actually, he helped us with the car wash proposal too, where he actually looked at ambient noise and the proximity of different types of residences. So maybe we'll reach out to him too and get some input on whether a decibel level makes sense. And I think what I'm hearing is you'd like us to bring you back at least an option or a draft or maybe a couple options of code language that you can consider to make modifications. Don't know exactly what that is yet, but I think we've heard enough that we have good direction.
I think that's a fair assessment, fair summary. Yeah, thank you. Anything else, any other announcements from staff this evening on any other items?
I do anticipate that we will have items at your November meeting and at your December meeting. I will note that on Monday night, the city council will be considering a settlement agreement for the McKinley Phase 3. I don't know what direction they'll go, but potentially that matter may come back before you. And there are also potentially some cleanup rezonings that we may bring before you. But I do anticipate a meeting both in November and December. And I don't know anything beyond that. Yes.
What's the December meeting? I know, is it the 14th, the December meeting?
Give me just a minute.
13th.
No,
Oh,
that's
Next year.
that's next year.
Was this,
It is the 14th.
14th,
yes.
perfect.
It is the 14th.
Thank you.
November meeting is the 9th.
Is there anything else from anybody?
That is all I have for you.
Is there an emotion to adjourn?
So moved.
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.